Hello and welcome to the Transfer Show brought to you by Sky Mobile, where we are here throughout the month to discuss the latest deals, transfers and gossip going on in the mad world of the transfer window. Joining me today for our first episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Sky Sports News reporter Dharmesh Sheth. Dharmesh, thank you very much for joining me.
No
How are you
problem.
doing?
Enjoying it?
Yes. Yeah, busy. McCubbs, we've got lots to discuss.
Yeah.
Michael McCubbin from Football Daily, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks, Diggs. Very well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, excited for today's show. We are talking about shock transfers that could happen by the end of the window. And we're going to kick off with Noussair Mazraoui's potential move to Man United. Before we get the latest with Dharmesh, McCubbs, just briefly, who is Noussair Mazraoui?
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know Noussair Mazraoui by now, he's a 26-year-old Moroccan right-back, plays for Bayern Munich, has been there for the last 2 years. But interestingly, in regards to this move, before he was at Bayern Munich, he was at Ajax for 5 years. All of those years in the senior setup under Erik ten Hag. He won 3 league titles under him, 2 Dutch Cups. Also won the league title with Bayern Munich on his first season there, although obviously didn't win it last year with Bayer Leverkusen taking the crown. Mazraoui is very familiar with Erik ten Hag and his style of play, at least what we saw, his style of play at Ajax. So I feel like that's why this transfer in many ways makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Dharmesh, what is the latest on this deal? Because there's a few moving parts, aren't there?
Yeah, I'm calling it a holding pattern at the moment. That's my phrase for Manchester United's approach in this transfer window, only because in keeping with what they're trying to do in this window, they're not trying to react, they're trying to be proactive in the window. So if they have certain areas they want to strengthen, for example, right back, centre back, maybe midfielder, they need to create squad space and budgets. That's the key for the rest of this window. Now, if you have a situation where they can sell a player, they don't want to be in a position where they sell him and think, who are we going to buy? They want to effectively agree deals in principle with a number of targets so that if and when a player leaves, they can go straight in and try and get a deal done. So with regard to Mazraoui, it's effectively agreed in principle, everything is, with Bayern Munich, with the player. The player wants to come, Bayern Munich want to do the deal. They're now just waiting for the Wan-Bissaka deal to get sorted. So with regard to Wan-Bissaka, United continue talks with West Ham United. A lot of the details of that deal have been agreed, but there's still work to do on the actual fee and how that structure of payments is going to be done by West Ham United. But there seems to be a willingness from all parties to try and get that one over the line. Personal terms, of course, have to be finalised on that front. So it's interesting how this one has developed, because less than 2 weeks ago, West Ham actually agreed a deal with Bayern Munich for Mazraoui for around 19.5 million euros, which would have meant that the dominoes that United wanted to fall into place wouldn't have, because they've got a situation where Wan-Bissaka is in the final year of his contract. There are no talks over a new deal. They need to sell him if they want to reinforce in that area. It just so happens, and some people might say it's cynically, that West Ham United have gone for the player that United want, and then will that help bring the price down for Wan-Bissaka? I'm not saying that's happened, but it hasn't hurt West Ham's approach in how they want to do this deal. Once they knew that Mazraoui wasn't going to come to West Ham, and United were continuing their pursuit of him, they probably saw an opportunity. Let's go back in for Wan-Bissaka. We don't want to pay the £15 million plus that Man United want. We want to compromise on that price, and that's what's happening now.
Okay, it sounds like some ducks are being lined up. But Mikey, let's talk about Mazraoui and his potential move to Man United, because he has had some injury issues. But this is a really talented player, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, one who's familiar with Ten Hag and his system. It feels like potentially in the new season, Ten Hag, United may revert to a bit more of a possession-based system again, like the one that he wanted to implement in his first season at the club, especially if they can get someone like Mazraoui. You kind of still expect, given his performances last year, that Diogo Dalot will probably still be first choice there. But then, of course, Dalot spent a lot of last season at left back because of the injuries to Luke Shaw and Taro Malacia. And, from my perspective, going into this summer, it felt like left back should have been a priority for United. But it also doesn't feel like there are many top class left backs on the market at the moment. And so in some ways it makes sense for them to strengthen at right back. Wan-Bissaka has never looked, in terms of his skill set, like a classic Ten Hag player, like amazing one-on-one defender. But when you look at his passing stats, when you look at his in-possession stats, when you look at him in terms of his contribution and build-up, he is more limited. Whereas Mazraoui, you look at his strengths, he still has very strong tackle and interception numbers, but his progressive passing numbers are absolutely outstanding. I think he's in the top 4% of right-backs in Europe's top 5 leagues for progressive passing. And so you think about what he could add to that United attack, someone who could probably help out in the midfield as well. Of course, that's another area that United are looking at. But someone who could, potentially invert there, offer something a little bit different to Dalot, who's, hugs the touchline a little bit more. I think barring injuries, Mazraoui looks like a really, really good profile of player for United to be going for in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the fact that he's played at left back in the past as well. He's covered as a right-sided centre-back, but those injuries are worth touching on. He's missed 31 games over the last 2 seasons. He's missed 73 in the last 4. He actually hasn't started over 16 league games in a season in any of the last 5 years. So there is a little bit of a risk to this deal, but actually with the fee that is being mooted, it doesn't feel like a substantial fee. And when a player of this quality who knows Ten Hag so well is available, then perhaps this is a good one for Man United to go for. We'll be keeping you up to date throughout this on Sky Sports News and analysing these transfers on the Transfer Show by Sky Mobile throughout the window. Let's talk about our next move, Dharmesh, which is one that dropped as a bit of a bombshell yesterday, with Lukaku potentially going to Napoli and Victor Osimhen going the other way. What's happening?
Right, so initially when Antonio Conte took over at Napoli, one of the first things he wanted to do was to bring Romelu Lukaku to the club. You remember what happened when they were together at Inter Milan? He was incredible, Lukaku was. They won the Serie A title, I think it was 2021. So he wants Romelu Lukaku in his team. You can't have both Romelu Lukaku and Osimhen in the team. I'm not saying, regardless of you guys will be more attuned to whether they can play together or not. I'm talking more about the finances of the whole situation. If you think about what happened last summer, Napoli gave Victor Osimhen a better contract. He's on big money, but they also inserted a release clause in that contract, which was over £100 million. So I think Napoli's approach was, well, everyone in Europe wants him. We've stuck a release clause on him, which is going to help us as well. And for that, we'll give him much more money, but we're only going to need to pay it for 1 season. It's easier said than done, because when it comes to the crunch, a lot of clubs can't actually pay the £100 million plus that would require for Osimhen to go. There was lots of Saudi interest in Osimhen, but all the noises we were getting were, at this stage of his career, it's probably not the move he wants to make. He wants to be in one of European football's top leagues. Ideal scenario, Champions League football, but top league was priority number 1. So with the Lukaku deal, I mean, everyone could see it from the outset, but it just wasn't being talked about at that stage. Why don't they just do some kind of swap? Swaps, by definition, sound easy. In reality, they're very, very complicated, because in this situation, it wouldn't be a straight swap because of the values of the players. You're looking at a valuation of around £35 million for Lukaku, which is much less than Osimhen. So what they're discussing at the moment, Chelsea and Napoli, we think, is a permanent deal for Romelu Lukaku, with Osimhen going to Chelsea with a permanent element built into that deal. The one thing that Napoli cannot afford to happen is just a simple dry loan for Osimhen and a permanent for Lukaku, because there's that situation that could happen next summer where both players will be at the club, and that can't be sustained because of the wages that they're both on. So ideal scenario now would be sell him permanently. If that can't happen, go on an initial loan with the guarantee of an obligation to buy at the end of that loan. So that's what's being discussed at the moment. There is so much work to be done on that deal, though, is what we've been told. It is not as simple as, right, let's just do that. There's so much involved with wages, with Osimhen and the permanent fee that they would have to pay, because would Chelsea still want to have to pay the release clause a year down the line? So all of those issues have to be discussed between the two clubs, hence why it is a really difficult deal to do. But because they're talking to each other, there must be an element of a deal can be done. So if it couldn't be, then we wouldn't be talking about them being under discussion still, but they are. So let's see if it can happen or not.
And the good news for Napoli and Chelsea fans, whoever's perspective you got, there's plenty of time left in the transfer window. We'll keep on monitoring this as it goes on. But Mikey, let's talk about it from a Chelsea perspective, because on paper in this deal, they feel like the real winners. They're getting rid of an unwanted player who is significantly older than Victor Osimhen, who has shown in Victor Osimhen really, close to world-class, if not world-class quality at his peak over the last few years when he's been injury-free.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we were, if this transfer or potential transfer was happening this time last year, then, Chelsea would be the envy of every other top club in Europe, because Osimhen was, really was the star striker in Europe this time last year, and actually has come off another pretty impressive campaign at Napoli. They finished 10th, which is their worst league performance since 2009. They only scored 55 goals, which is their worst tally in Serie A since 2010. And yet, Osimhen still scored 15 goals. He was one of only, I think, 4 Napoli players to score more than 3, and he still had a very good output. And when you look at the kind of underlying numbers in terms of the chances that he was getting on the end of, he was still pretty productive, which is pretty amazing in a Napoli side which was all over the place last season, multiple different managers, only really Osimhen and Nketiah performing near their top level. And so this is a player who, at 25 years of age, is, still very much in his peak years. He's had injury and fitness problems in the past, but that was mainly, when he was a very young player in his kind of late teens, early 20s.
And quite niche injuries as well.
Quite niche injuries.
Eye injury.
There was that eye injury at Napoli, of course, I think it was at the 2021 season. And yeah, so since the beginning of the 2022-23 campaign, he's missed 25 games for club and country. He's only played 30-plus league games in a season once. But at the same time, over the last few years, and let's remember he's played at AFCONs as well, he generally has actually played a pretty decent number of minutes. I don't think injuries should be a prime concern going into this deal. I think that, what Chelsea would be getting here is, I think, a world-class number 9. It's just whether he can fit into Enzo Maresca's system. But, throughout his career, especially since he went to Charleroi, where he, performed really well in Belgium, and then to Lille, and then to Napoli, he has hit at least double figures in the league, I think, for the last 5 or 6 years. His goal output has remained very, very steady. And as someone who can also bring wingers into play, we've seen his relationship with Nketiah. He's absolutely excellent. It just, we're just yet to see exactly what this Chelsea team are going to perform like on a consistent basis under Maresca. I guess that's the only question mark, because, I think with Chelsea, well, especially for Chelsea fans, there will always be anxieties over a big money number 9, because so many have failed in the past. But Osimhen feels like as safe a bet as you can get, and is certainly not, is certainly far above the level of a striker that I was expecting Chelsea to be able to get this transfer window. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you saw them linked with John Duran earlier this summer. This is a completely different calibre of player, or at least, where he is in his career right now, and just a completely different level. Sure. The pace, the power that he brings, his enormous spring as well. And prior to last season, his goals per minute ratio wasn't dissimilar to a player like Harry Kane over the previous 3-4 years. So this is a real goal scorer. And a great player for someone like Nicholas Jackson to learn off next year. And I think he really does. If they get Osimhen through the door for Lukaku, it really does elevate Chelsea into that top 4 discussion, maybe even 3rd this year. So let's see what happens with this one for sure. Speaking of big name departures or well-known players leaving Dharmesh, at Arsenal, we've seen Calafiori come in. They've been heavily linked with Mikel Merino, but it feels like they're now sort of financing that by a few academy graduates leaving. Emile Smith-Rowe joined Fulham, and there's talk around Nketiah and Reiss Nelson. What's happening there? Yeah,
so Smith-Rowe, that's on the verge of being done. £34 million all in. That's a club record for Fulham. I think a lot of Arsenal fans, if you look on social media, they're a little bit sad about it. One of their own. I know we've heard that phrase before, but and not least because they can't sing the Saka Smith-Rowe song with such gusto anymore. But
it was catchy.
Yeah, so there's that, but there's also Nketiah and Reiss Nelson, as you mentioned there. The Nketiah one looks like it's developing now, because Marseille had been interested throughout this transfer window. there was a big gap in valuation. We didn't think that Arsenal were going to accept anything near what Marseille were offering. That proved to be the case, but they've come back, and we expected them to. They've come back with a bid in the region of £17 million. Now, I'm not saying that that's what Arsenal would accept, but there's enough confidence, I think, in the talks that there's a possibility a deal can be done using that as the base, because Marseille have come back with obviously a much bigger offer than they were offering originally. So at this stage, the talks are ongoing. There's still work to be done on the fee and the structure, but it is much closer to what Arsenal would want for Nketiah than what Marseille were offering before. And it's clear that Marseille want the player. It's clear from all the information we're getting that Nketiah is very keen on the move. His primary motivation, rather like the likes of Emile Smith-Rowe and Reiss Nelson, is first team football. And it just seems Arsenal, every single summer, what they're trying to do is just get that extra margin. People are talking about, was Calafiori a necessary addition? Is that the area they needed to strengthen in? But then when you strip it back and see what Arteta's trying to do, oh, hold on, he can do what Ben White does. But on the other side, Jurrien Timber can play in a variety of positions as well. I think what Arteta and Arsenal are trying to do here is they can see the first 11, 12, 13, 14 players can challenge anyone. After that, I'm not saying that they can't, but I'm thinking that Arteta wants to close that gap. So everyone who comes into the squad now, the gap that you're going to see in the performance at Arsenal, he's hoping is going to be less than what it was before. So the likes of Nketiah, Smith-Rowe and Reiss Nelson, I'm not saying that they weren't closing that gap, but for their own careers, they weren't getting the regular football that they wanted. So Smith-Rowe is a clear one. That one's Fulham. Marseille look very close to signing Nketiah. Reiss Nelson looks like he's going to assess all of his options after this tour.
There's a few clubs sort of being...
Yeah, so what's happened with Nketiah, Smith-Rowe and Nelson is you can kind of read between the lines to see how far these deals have gone. Arteta has pulled Smith-Rowe out of action. There's stuff going on in the background, he's admitted that, and we know how close it is now to Fulham. Nketiah and Reiss Nelson have played, and they featured in these games on the US tour. I'm interested to see now what's going to happen with Nketiah on this tour, whether he will be withdrawn slightly because of this renewed interest from Marseille. Reiss Nelson looks like it's a different case because after the tour, I think they will assess all of his options. Leicester City have been in talks. West Ham have shown an interest. There's European clubs who are interested in Reiss Nelson as well. The information I'm getting is, as much as he'd be open to a move, he's played abroad before, the preference as it stands would probably be to retain Premier League and stay in the Premier League. So I think that one will probably develop once the tour is finished.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about those sort of 2% around the pitch as well, because he has been quite ruthless with some transfer decisions in recent memory. You know, Ramsdale getting replaced by David Raya, Martinelli becoming a little bit more bit part last year. We've seen Thomas Partey drop out of the side as well. And Nketiah, you know, would be their third choice striker next year, with Havertz probably their first choice, followed by Gabriel Jesus. But from a fit in terms of Marseille as well, it's really interesting because he's replacing a former Arsenal player in Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who's joined Saudi club Al Qadisa. They've also brought in Mason Greenwood, Pierre-Emile Højbjerg. So it feels like Roberto De Zerbi is using that Premier League knowledge to really strengthen his Marseille squad, who didn't have a great year last year. Only Aubameyang scored more than 3 league goals for them, so he did need more firepower. And then Reiss Nelson didn't feel like he was going to feature that much this season. There's been talk about Leroy Sané interesting Arsenal. I'm not quite sure about the validity of that, but they do have a lot of depth across the forward line as well. So if he can go get Premier League football or go get regular first team football somewhere else, I think that makes sense at his stage of his career. Right, let's wrap up before we get into our Sky Mobile switch of the week with a discussion about Ederson's potential move to Saudi Arabia. Now, just before we started filming this, there was a little bit of an update on this. According to reports, Al Ittihad are reportedly close to signing Predrag Rajkovic, the Serbian goalkeeper who was in goal for Serbia during the course of Euro 2024, plays for Mallorca. So this maybe feels a little less likely than it did when we were sort of scripting this and thinking about it yesterday. But Mikey, Ederson to Al Ittihad has still been talked about, and that would be a big decision for Man City to let a quality goalkeeper like that go.
Huge, and I think Pep Guardiola's been been pretty firm in his, in his stance that he doesn't want Ederson to leave. But, as has always been the case with him, if a player really, really wants to go and the offer is right, then they are allowed to go. You kind of, going back to the kind of Emile Smith-Rowe stuff at Arsenal, it feels like Arteta has, there's certain things that I see in him that's, similar to the Guardiola playbook, especially in terms of like getting in someone like Calafiori, really shoring up that back line with a very versatile player, but then also, letting players leave who potentially would otherwise, not be at their, not be at full morale around the squad if they're not getting minutes. Obviously, Ederson, different story because he is the first choice. But, City seem to be demanding around 50 million euros. The previous reports of Al Nassr bidding 30 million, being rejected. And of course, he's coming off that injury, made his first start last weekend against Milan, but missed the Copa America with Brazil. But yeah, he'd obviously be a massive loss. 6 Premier League titles. He was, one of the defining players, if not the defining player, of kind of Pep Guardiola, kind of finalising his philosophy at Man City. Brought in 2017 after the Claudio Bravo experiment failed, and instantly, just transformed the way that Man City played, and already must be considered one of the great ball-playing goalkeepers of all time. His shot stopping has been called into question in the last couple of years. I think especially in the 22-23 season, it was really below par. Last season he brought it back a little bit, but I guess that's one area where City could still gain an edge on Arsenal if they were to. I say gain an edge; they've already got the edge, obviously after last season, but keep that edge. I guess that's one area, and if there was like an alternative out there, if they were to get a good £50 million for Ederson, then maybe you'd look at someone like Diogo Costa at Porto. Obviously, became a bit of a household name at the Euros with that amazing penalty shootout performance against Slovenia. But he is one player who has, he just profiles so well for a keeper of his age. He's 24 years old. His save percentage has never dropped below 71%, which is really elite stuff. He's also in the top kind of 13% of keepers for coming out of his area and sweeping up play, and profiles around the same as Ederson for that, if not a little bit below him, but is, I think a more consistent shot stopper than Ederson, is also great with his feet, if not, doesn't have the experience that Ederson has, so isn't quite the kind of, dictator from the back that Ederson is right now, but he would also cost a lot of money. I think Porto were reportedly quoting around 75 million euros last summer when he was, again, there were clubs sniffing around. This summer, he's still got 3 years left on his contract, so it would still take a hefty fee, but I feel like that's why City, are supposedly quoting, that those kind of numbers for Ederson, because if they do lose him, then they need to get in someone quick, and it will probably cost them quite a lot of money if they want to uphold the level, that Ederson's shown between the sticks. Of course, they've got Stefan Ortega there, who's performed admirably.
Made that save, that iconic save.
Yeah, made that iconic save against Tottenham that won them the league. But, it has stepped up, but he still hasn't played that many games for City. I think it might be 8 Premier League starts over the last 2 seasons. Before then, he was at Arminia Bielefeld in Germany. I think he'd only played 2 top-flight seasons before coming to City. Spent most of his career in the German second tier. So do you give that responsibility of, potentially like 60 games, fighting on all fronts for the Champions League, for the Premier League, to a keeper who, doesn't have that much top-level experience, even if he has been around the Man City camp for a couple of years? I'm not so sure.
Yeah, that does feel like a slight risk. Right, guys, it's time for our Sky Mobile Switch of the Week. This is our favourite completed deal from the last week. Dharmesh, I'll give you the honours. What was your favourite deal that was completed?
I'd have to probably say Calafiori. From a personal perspective, because I was saying his name in my sleep for about 3 weeks.
You can forget about him.
But yeah, it's done. But I mean, it just looks like a really impressive signing. And it's another sign, as we've been discussing before, just on what Arsenal are trying to do to just increase those percentages to close the gap on Man City. And I just wonder whether, when you look at this transfer window and you look at Arsenal and Manchester City, all the talk about City seems to be what's happening with De Bruyne, what's happening with Ederson, what's happening with Julian Alvarez. I just wonder whether Arsenal seeing this as a big opportunity to think we can close the gap. This is the window to close the gap. Let's make the most of it and then see where it takes us next season. Because 2 seasons ago they fell short, but they challenged. Last season they took it to the last game. Is it now time for that next step? Let's see.
Let's see indeed. It's going to be an absolutely fascinating Premier League title battle. I'm going to go with Ryan Sessegnon to Fulham. Now, this is actually more from the player's perspective. I feel like he had such an unfortunate time at Spurs. You know, numerous different managers there. You felt maybe with Ivan Perisic's injury last season, he'd get a chance this year, but his contract expired. He spent last year on loan at Hoffenheim, played okay for them as they finished sort of mid-table in the Bundesliga, but he's gone back to Fulham, the club that Spurs bought him from. Great opportunity to re-establish himself at the sharp end of English football alongside Emile Smith-Rowe. I think they'll both be really hungry. Fulham look set for a quite challenging year, I would say. You know, having lost João Palhinha and the impact he made there, but I'm really delighted that Ryan Sessegnon's got that move back to his home club, let's say, and can hopefully get himself back to full fitness and start performing once again. What about you, Mikey?
I've also gone for a club who could be in the relegation dogfight this coming season. Southampton, obviously newly promoted from the Championship, getting a deal for Ben Brereton Diaz over the line. 8.3 million euros from Villarreal, where he didn't have a great time after that free transfer from Blackburn last year. But yeah, I think this is a really astute move. I think it works out well for both clubs. You know, he went to Villarreal for free last summer. They've made a profit on him in that sense. But Southampton are getting someone who showed really, really good signs in that loan move to Sheffield United, which got completed in January. Obviously, Sheffield United last season were really, really poor. The 3rd least points any team has accrued in Premier League history. And yet, he still got 6 goals in 14 starts. I think 5 of those were from open play as well. And his underlying numbers compared to when he was at Blackburn in the Championship, where he famously scored 22 goals in the 21-22 season, you know, got into the Chile national setup off the back of that. His underlying numbers still look really good. He's still averaging around 3 shots a game in a really, really poor Sheffield United side. This Southampton team, I think, should be a level above that Sheffield United team. Played really, really good possession football in the Championship last season under Russell Martin. Yeah, I think this could be a really interesting transfer. Of course, Che Adams leaving Southampton to go to Torino as well, so they needed backup in that area. He can play wide as well. It'll be interesting to see how him and Adam Armstrong link up. So yeah, I think this is a really fun move.
Absolutely. There we have it. Those are our Sky Mobile switches of the week. Those will be back next week. Let us know in the comments who you'd have chosen as your Sky Mobile switch of the week too. And just before we go, remember, it's never been easier to change your network over to Sky Mobile. All you need to do is text PAC to 65705. So that's text PAC to 65705 and Sky Mobile will do the rest. Guys, thank you so much for watching the first transfer show brought to you by Sky Mobile. We'll be back throughout the month. Thanks very much to Dharmesh. Thank you to Mikey, and we'll catch you next week.